Hey there, this is Matt Petrowski, and in this video, as a FileMaker learner, you are interested in learning about the let function. So stick with me, and we will be on my desktop in moments. All right, so you are interested in learning about FileMaker, and I'm interested in teaching you everything I know as a new FileMaker learner. Now, we've gone through a lot of different areas in a lot of other videos. In fact, if you've been following along with this series, I've had a few people ask me, why did the numbers restart over again? Well, I'm breaking FileMaker down into segments, if this is confusing. The first segment is FileMaker's environment, so that's videos 1 through 15, and then the second segment we're working on is fields and calculations. Then we're going to work on data and structure, scripting, automation, however many sections I actually get to. So I hope that provides a little bit of clarification. Otherwise, if not, leave a comment down below and I will be able to get to that, and maybe I just change the titles. But today we're learning about FileMaker's let function. And each of these videos run about 30 minutes, and then I go into some questions and answers as I'm doing this live. So if you'd like to follow along, what we're going to be doing is going up to the File menu, and I'm going to choose this option of Get Started. Now, Get Started is going to bring up FileMaker's original little document, or its welcome window. I'm going to use the contact solution for this particular video. Now, if you don't have a copy of FileMaker 16, which is what I'm using, then you can, of course, use any other solution and just follow along, get the data into your file. So I'm going to create this file, and it will put it onto my desktop. All right, so we have been looking at all kinds of different things related to FileMaker's environment, and now we're learning the one function that I think you should learn first if you are a new FileMaker learner. Now, it can seem like a confusing function to learn, but hopefully I'll make this really clear and you'll start to see the benefits of this function right away. Now, in the past, we had I'm going to add some text here as I zoom in. I'm going to just add a phone number, 800-555-1212. Now, in one of my previous videos, in fact, if you'd like to go check it out on YouTube, it's the one about custom functions. What I did is I showed you how to actually convert this number, or basically use a custom function in order to apply formatting to this particular field. So that when the user enters data, it doesn't matter how they enter it, with periods, dashes, the formatting that you apply gets applied to that. Now, we'll take a look at field options, but before we take a look at the field options and the auto enter, if you're not already familiar with it, which is what we would use in order to convert this, when I tab out of this, I get a really plain looking number. In fact, I actually get values like this. If I put in that dash, let's put in a dash in between that, and then let's put in a slash between here. Let's really mess this up, and you should do the same on your copy as well. 800, let's say this person really doesn't know what they're doing when they input the data, and we get something that looks like that. Absolutely horrendous. Well, with that data in the field, we need to know that we can actually clean this up. And in order to do that, I'm going to walk you through the let function. Now, I have a copy of FileMaker Advanced, and if you have FileMaker Advanced, it comes with this script debugger and this data viewer, which are really helpful because you can compose your calculations right in the data viewer, and you don't have to do it in a separate FileMaker field. So I'm going to use the data viewer. If you're in FileMaker Pro, then you're going to need to create a calculation field in order to follow along. You can do that in the defined database. Just create a calculation, you'll be able to follow along. Now I'm going to switch to this watch area, and I'm going to click the little plus down here. And that plus is basically going to open up FileMaker's calculation engine. And yesterday, or in the previous video, if you haven't watched any of the other videos in this series, we talked about FileMaker's calculation engine and how pervasive it is in all of FileMaker. Well, over here on the side of all of FileMaker's functions, we can see that we've got a lot of them. In fact, I have functions that won't even show up on your copy, such as this B box. That's coming from a plugin, so you'll have to ignore that if you don't see that in your copy. But as we scroll through these, we can see that there are quite a lot of functions, and that can be pretty daunting in terms of learning all of them. Well, I'm going to switch right here and just give you a little bit of a clue in terms of what you'll probably end up using the most when it comes to functions. And we'll have another video where we go through functions. In this video, we're talking just about let. But most of the time, you'll be dealing with a lot of text and using a lot of text functions. Text formatting and so forth. Number, dates, times, timestamps, those are all pretty standard. Containers. You won't deal as much with the financial, the trigonometric, if that's how you say that. You will deal with the logical a lot. Repeating, maybe we'll look at repeating fields. And get, we've already gone through those. That's another video we've done. Design, we'll talk about some of all of these different functions. But let's do the let function. All right, now in this expression editor, or FileMaker's calculation engine, I can start to type LET, and FileMaker will actually bring up or filter down all of the different available functions. Well, the let function right there, what we can see comes in and it's pretty messy looking. So let's break this down into at least first understanding what all of these different symbols mean in FileMaker's calculation, in all of its calculation functions, is what I'm trying to say. So first off, whenever you see this opening bracket, that means that what this is representing is anything in between these is an optional value. So in other words, this bracket right here is optional, meaning I don't have to use it, but I can use it. In fact, I need to use it if I have more than one expression or variable, if you will. So let's break that down. The first version is let, and we can have something equal to anything. Now, I want you to think about this for a second, and we will have a result right here. I want you to think about this. If you were dealing with having to manually assign something to a group of people or manage something, you can write everything down on one piece of paper. But if you need to basically distribute these to other people, you're basically going to cut the paper up into little strips, little pieces. And maybe you'll have some blank pieces for new people who come into the group. Well, you're just going to grab one of those blank pieces and then write something on it. It is no different in FileMaker. Each one of these that you create is basically just like a new little blank piece of paper. There's nothing in it until you put something in it, and you can create as many of them as you want. So the second form of FileMaker's let function looks like this. In order to have multiple of those items, you're going to have to use that value where it says it's optional right here. So this designates to FileMaker, I'm going to have more than one now. So I can have something equal to anything. And then everything in FileMaker has to be delimited. There has to be a stopping point where FileMaker knows where something stops and where it starts. So that's the colon, but there's a little trick. You can actually use the comma, but in some foreign language versions of FileMaker, you can't use the comma because it's representing something else. So, and now let's put another equals something else. Now you can see what's happening right here. And if I use this opening bracket, I have to use this closing bracket because basically it's representing that everything between these two brackets is basically saying if you're going to have more than one expression, then you optionally can have more than one expression. You have to include the opening bracket, and then you have to also include any additional items plus the closing bracket. So we can see that we're going to need to close that right there, and look what comes after the closing bracket. We have that semicolon. So again, the semicolon actually gives you the stopping point. So now you actually have a result. Now here's the first lesson in code formatting. This is starting to get very difficult to read, and I really hate this about some FileMaker developers. Sorry if you're one of them out there. They just leave their code messy. And messy code, even when you have to go read it yourself again, is messy, and it's very difficult to read. So at this point, we take the opportunity to clean this code up. In FileMaker's calculation dialog box, we are able to insert tabs. We can't do it just by hitting the tab key by itself, but we can do it if we use the option key or the alt key in order to inject a tab. So I'm using the option key with my thumb right now while I hit the tab, and that tabs that item in. I'm now going to do it for the second value, and tab that in. I'm now also going to do it with the end of all of my options and put that on its own line. Then I'm going to take the result and put it on its own line as well. And then finally, we have to have this closing parenthesis. So this is the whole format for a let function, or these are the two options that you have. The first one is right here. It's the singular format. This second one is the multiple format, and this is how I like to format my let function. Some developers will do this. They'll actually put this item on its own line, and if that makes more sense to you, you can indent those like this. Whatever is going to be easiest to read, that's what our objective is. So I like to look at it like this, and again, it's that option tab in order to get things in. All right, so here comes the second part of this lesson. FileMaker has this thing, or the let function, I should say, has this thing called scope. So scope can only be seen within a certain area, the scope of what can be seen. So I'm going to zoom out here, and we're going to open up, let's see if I can. I may not be able to. I'm going to copy this. Don't worry, it didn't go anywhere really quickly because I want to get scripts open right now. Not define database, let's open up scripts. So we've got script workspace, and I'll just happen to select on, I'll create a new script really quickly. And we'll call that anything, and we'll say set variable. And if you watched the previous lesson to this one, lesson 3, we talked about variables and how you can use them. We'll go into variables more in depth, but this can be anything I want, and it can be something. All right, so we have a script right here, and we'll create that variable again, and we'll put it so I can zoom back in. All right, so let's talk about the scope of a let function. And hopefully it makes sense now what I've got on screen. Let's zoom out a little bit more there so we can move it in. So I'm going to take FileMaker's way that it formats the function off the calculation, and we're not going to use the singular version right now. We actually used that in the previous video. We're going to use the multiple variation in order to discuss scope in the let function. All right, so what we're talking about is what can the result see, or what can FileMaker see in terms of the scope of what things are limited to. So first off, this result right here can be any calculation. It's basically it's what the let function is going to return. So all of these items up here in this first part of the let function are these little strips of paper. They're blank. You can create as many as you want. And this basically becomes your playground. It can be whatever you want. So we're going to take that phone number that we added. We're going to select this one, and we're going to rename things, and we're going to call this phone. And we can call this is a key point here, we can name this whatever we want, however we want. Well, provided it's a valid FileMaker characters, it will allow FileMaker characters. I can't use certain reserved characters like a plus sign, a divide sign, minus, etc. But there are characters that we can use that we'll see that will make things easier for us to understand what's going on. So this doesn't have to be a literal string. Right now, this is called a literal string, and phone would return anything. In fact, let's see what it would return. FileMaker down here, this is the good thing about the data viewer, has this option of automatically evaluate. So if I say phone, this little strip of paper is going to equal anything, another is going to equal something else, let's see what we can get as a result by simply typing in phone. And look at FileMaker returns anything. Well, let's just change that out, and let's say, FileMaker, give me another. Show me what is stored in another. Well, FileMaker is returning something else. So that's pretty cool. And the coolest part about the let function is it allows you to break really complex calculations down into smaller chunks so it's much easier to understand. That's the whole objective, I think, of the let function. It lets you make sense of things where a really long FileMaker calculation can be very convoluted and complex, especially if you've got a lot of embedded things where you just want to make things a lot easier. And it's a lot easier to actually test your code this way as well. So let's go get that phone number. I think I put it in, did I put it in mobile? I think I did. We can always check that by, let's see what phone actually returns. Maybe it wasn't contacts mobile. I'm going to monitor this really quickly and just go see where I put that phone number. Office phone, that's where I put it, right there. All right, always good to get the right field in the right calculation. All right, so office phone is what we're dealing with, and there we go. There is our office phone. All right, so now we start to ask ourselves, what can we actually do now that we're here in the let function? This is where you get to start to play with FileMaker's other functions. You get to process things, but you get to do it in a way that is so much more comfortable than embedded within embedded within embedded. Because any one of these pieces of information, these variables, they can reference any other variables. And we're going to get to that concept of scope here in terms of what can be seen by this result. So if we take this another, and we now use a different FileMaker function. We're going to go over here. You can follow along and see what it is. I'm going to type in filter. Now I could have just started to type it right here. In fact, that's the easiest thing to do because FileMaker's calculation engine knows and is indexed or has all of the different items that as I start to type FILT, filter comes up. So when I hit return, it just puts that in there for me, which is really nice. So now we can see what this particular function expects. Well, normally I might go over here and click and say, I want to put the office phone in this text to filter. Well, I can now reference this little name that I gave it, making it much more convenient. So I want to reference phone. And the way that the filter function works is it basically says I'm going to act like a sieve. You tell me what I want, what you want out of what you're supplying. So I'm supplying the phone number, and what do I want to filter out of that phone number? Well, we already saw that the user put in a bunch of garbage, and it would be really difficult to actually look at and pick out what I don't want, where it's much easier to pick out what I do want. Well, I want every digit, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So our let function now, what is the result? The result is returning the raw phone number, which is simply directly referencing the field. Now let's tell the let function to reference another. Aha, this is pretty cool. What happens is we were able to break this down into little pieces. First off, we said, here's the phone. Next off, we said, what do we want to do to that phone? Well, the next thing that we could do would be whatever next step we actually want to take. So let's add another one. You can see as I add that semicolon and add another return, I can put in something like area code. And what is that going to equal? Well, we know now that phone is the raw data. Another is filtering out just the numbers. Now I could take the area code and actually just say, what do I want to get? Well, FileMaker has some really easy functions of left and right. So if I type in left, I get the left function. And what text do I want to use? Well, I'll just double click here, copy, double click and paste. How many characters do you want? Now, typically it's going to be the first 3 characters, at least here in the US. And now I can say, well, I'm showing another. Why don't I show area code 800? Wonderful. So you can see that the let function allows you to start to break things down in a very easy to understand way. And that's why I love this, because it makes things that are really complex much more simple. So I'm going to show you, we're going to talk about scope before I wrap this video up in terms of what the let function can see within itself and what it can see outside of itself. And that's a very important concept to get. But I want to give you with one more tip. In like 2010, I released some standards over at FileMakerStandards.org, which I had been using going all the way back to like 2007. Because what happens in FileMaker is if you don't have standards, it's very difficult to pick out of a complex calculation. The bigger that they get, it's very difficult to determine what's what in terms of how FileMaker names things. Now, if we look at FileMaker's functions, all FileMaker's functions name them like this. It's called camel case, function name. Then you may have a field which is named something like first space name. Then you're going to have maybe your own custom functions, which you can name them anything, and users have named them all kinds of different things. FileMaker fields themselves will be named like this: table occurrence, and I hope I spell that right, with the double semicolon or double colon, and then the field. And it may be field space name. Now I sort of made this determination that things get really confusing in terms of looking at a lot of text and understanding which part is which is a field, which is a function, which is a variable. Variables are very easy to identify. Variables are always preceded by a $sign. So a local variable, which we're going to see as applies to scope, is very difficult. And then we have a global variable. Now typically you don't have spaces in these. Global variable and underscore name. So what I did is I decided I want to be able to very clearly understand and know what is what. So what I decided to do is I decided to name my fields lower camel case with no spaces. So I set up a standard. FileMaker enforces this one right here. So this would actually become something that looks like first name. Lowercase variables were something that would always be something that would stay lowercase, but then global variables, I decided to uppercase. So it would look like this. And then when it came to FileMaker's let functions, when I have all of this text clustered within here, I wanted one more step to make things easier to understand. And so what I decided to use was this little tilde character. So when you see my FileMaker functions, this little tilde character has no meaning in FileMaker other than to make things easier to understand out of a function like let. So here, if we simply just change all of these and we get rid of these, we still get our result. And what happens is now this gets a lot easier for me to read, at least as a developer, and maybe for you as well, where I can say filter the phone number. Okay, where is this phone number coming from? Well, this is a local variable only to the let function, meaning the let function itself, or in a script or in another FileMaker calculation, nothing else can see this. In fact, we're going to do something here. We're going to concatenate to this 800 using the little concatenation character. We're going to say, is the area code. So here's where scope. We talk about scope and what can be seen inside of a let function and what can be seen outside of a let function and so forth. So we have a string that says 800 is the area code. Nothing inside of this let function can be seen outside of it when it's a variable that you have created in this manner. So watch what happens. If I say 800 is the area code from, and I put in tilde phone, that's what it's just going to return. It's going to literally return tilde phone because it can't be seen outside of this calculation. In fact, I can cut this and I can attempt to concatenate this right here. And we can see that anything that's inside of the let function, because the let function stops right here, anything that is inside of this cannot be seen outside of this particular function. It's all internal with these locally scoped variables only relevant to the let function. But if I want to see something outside of this particular function, I can do that. That's because the let function has the ability to set both local variables and global variables. So watch what happens when we just go in and we add yet another variable, but in this time we use the special designation of the $sign. We'll say, actually, I want the filtered version. Let's put it after this one. So we'll put a $sign here and we'll say phone digits. All right, now what we're doing is we're within the let function, which has this special ability, we're basically telling it, we want you to create something that within the context of this whole calculation, not just the let function, we want something to be visible outside of this function. It's going to be phone digits. So in this case, let's just actually reference another. And watch what happens when we get, or as a result, the concatenation that we'd have down here at the bottom when we now start to reference phone digits. And I'm just going to copy it. And I'll put that $sign and I'll put that, and let's see, and phone digits. That should be giving me a result. Why am I not getting result there? Let's make sure. This is a good mistake for me to hit. This is something that's very good to come across as a newer FileMaker developer. You will always get frustrated because something won't work when you expect it to work. I expected that to work, but only after years of working with FileMaker, I can see that I missed something. FileMaker isn't really telling me anything. It's just telling me table missing. Well, why is that? Didn't I get the code right? What I forgot was I forgot to add my semicolon at the end of this. And as soon as I do, look what happens. I can now see outside of the context of this let function, because within the let function, I used a local variable. In the rest of my calculation, I can actually see the value that is returned. Now, we'll get into a topic of collisions later on down the road, but this applies to both local variables and global variables. In the previous video in this series, I talked about the 3 places that you can store data. The first one is within your fields. That's permanent. The second one is within these local variables, which is really only they exist only during the time that a script is running. Then we also have these semi-permanent variables, which are the double $sign or the global variables that exist only for the duration of time that FileMaker is running. Once that copy of FileMaker is shut down, those variables go away. So again, if I was to make this a double digits and reference that, that too will actually evaluate. But in this particular case, what happens is the variable actually persists. So if we zoom out and we click monitor and we switch over here from the watch to the current, we will see that phone digits will continue to persist. If we go into that and we change it, again, if we change it back to the local variable, we will see that it will not persist. Well, it'll actually still be there because once set, a global variable doesn't really go away until you actually set it to nothing or get rid of it. And that's really how you get rid of it, by setting it to nothing. So I would have to do that. How would you do that? Well, we might as well do that right here. Let's take the opportunity to clear that out. So these are 2 different variables, a global variable versus a local variable, even with the same name, are 2 different things. So what I've done is FileMaker is, let's think about this from FileMaker standpoint. I'm going to create a little strip of paper, and on that piece of paper, I'm going to put the original phone number. That's with all the garbage. I'm going to create another strip of paper, and on that strip of paper, I'm going to take off all of the garbage that the user entered. I am then going to set this global variable, which would persist for the duration of time that this file is open, to nothing, meaning get rid of it. I am then going to set a little local variable that will actually just exist as long as this calculation is evaluated and will be accessible outside of the scope of this let function. I'm then going to take just the left 3 digits of this area code. I'm going to return the area code, then I'm going to glue to that the string of is the area code from, and then I'm going to glue to that the value that exists only while the calculation is being evaluated. And now when we zoom out, there is our result right there, exactly what we want. 800 is the area code from 800-555-1212, and over in current, we've got phone digit phone. Well, this is the problem with working within the data viewer. There is a little snafu that will happen that as long as this data viewer is open and those variables are constantly being evaluated, watch what happens when I go back and forth to watch. Sometimes you'll get variables that will build on each other because FileMaker is constantly evaluating this. But if you close this down, if you turn it off and those variables aren't being evaluated and we bring it back up, we should have got a reset, but we're not because of the evaluation of the calc. Probably a bad example to do this all in a watch variable. And most of this applies within your own calculations when you're using the let function and within the script workspace when you're creating your automation. So the whole point of this lesson, because we got down a little in the weeds there, we got a little deep with what you can do with the let function. Typically, you will not see these values within a let function. Typically, you're not setting and unsetting local variables and setting and unsetting global variables unless you know that you want to do that and unless you know that you want to see things outside of the scope of the let function. For the purpose of this video, really the core lesson that we were trying to learn is the fact that we can basically do this. We can break our complex calculations down. We can test and play with other functions, and we can do it in a way that makes it much easier to understand, especially as we're learning FileMaker, because it gets very convoluted when you start to do things like this. Left. Well, let's do it. Let's actually make the function as it would be if it was convoluted. Left, filter, contacts, office, phone. Now, this isn't too bad when you compare these two. In fact, let's scroll this out so we can compare the two. We're looking at the readability between these two items right here. This one, we're 3 functions deep now, 3 functions embedded. That can get a little bit, if you're really good at FileMaker reading, you can read that. Okay, we're taking the office phone number, we're filtering it down to its digits, and we're getting the leftmost 3 digits. You can see that from an I standpoint, you're bumping back and forth because you've got to go here, then you've got to go, I'm filtering. What am I filtering on? I'm filtering on the number. What am I taking the left of? I'm now taking the left of 3. Whereas here, I'm saying, I'm getting the phone number, I'm getting another, and I'm filtering it. I'm getting the area code, and I'm taking the left of that. Okay, I'm getting the area code. So hopefully you see the value in this particular approach. You're not always going to use the let function. It's not the end-all, be-all of all functions, although it is my most favorite. But you really have to determine, do I want to make this code easier to understand once it starts to get super complex, or am I okay with these 3 embedded? Most of the time, in this scenario, I'd be okay with these 3 embedded. But a lot of the times, I will use the let function. And so that's our lesson for today. Let me get to our questions, see if we've got any on the live chat. Otherwise, if you're watching this after the fact, then you can, of course, and let me get this in here, get rid of that, make sure my function will evaluate. We'll go take a look at those questions, see what we have that came in. All right. So, I'm always a beginner. Is this beginner? What is down the road? Ahmed actually mentioned, I don't know if it's showing on the questions over here, but we had a question that came in. Oh my gosh, you know, this isn't beginner. If you need to watch this video again, go ahead and watch it again. Maybe it's not beginner, but from the standpoint of being a beginner, I would much rather have known this at the outset. That makes it much easier for me to digest and break things down and understand them. It's when you define the field under, looks like we've got a little bit of chat going on. If you've been watching this live in terms of some of the questions, is filter case sensitive? It is not, I don't believe, and you can always test whether a function is or is not case sensitive. Good question. Let's actually go take a look at that. Let's go into FileMaker's data viewer. Let's quickly take a look because I don't even know if I know. FileMaker is typically, as an application, not a case-sensitive application. Here's the best way to test any of the questions you might have. Just put in literal values of what you want to do. It's the easiest way to test whether FileMaker's function does or doesn't do something. So A, and now let's give it filter text of A and see what it returns. It is case-sensitive, in fact. So that's a good thing to know because I have a capital A and a lowercase a, and by providing it with a lowercase a, it only returns that. But in the rest of FileMaker, it is key to know that for the most part, FileMaker doesn't necessarily distinguish between case sensitivity. So these things, these variables that we've been talking about, when you reference a variable, which we'll learn in scripting, these are all the same as far as FileMaker is concerned. So that's a key thing to know. When you reference these in a script, these are all exactly the same. So in that regard, FileMaker is not case sensitive, but certain functions like the filter function probably will be case sensitive. So good question there for that one. All right, let's switch to I'm not going to be able to have that. Let's switch back to the chat, see if we've got any more that have come in here. All right, and I'm taking a look at my chat. All right, so are you saying that you can create a variable within the let function, or for that matter, any calc dialog, and one doesn't have to create the variable in the script workspace? I am saying exactly that. In fact, the let function allows you to instantiate variables in so many ways. We'll get into it when we take a look at a script, but if you wanted to create 5 different variables, you can do that within one set variable step using a let function and create those variables, as opposed to 5 different set variable steps. Totally legitimate. The distinction is, by doing it in one set variable step, you're actually potentially obscuring some of your code. It really depends on how complex your let function is, but it's fully readable. So the example there in that one would be, let's take a look at that. We'll zoom in here, hide the data viewer, and zoom in. So in this set variable, if I wanted to do this, I'll call it create, and this doesn't have to be named anything. It can be named whatever you want. And I'm just going to type this because I know how to do it really quickly here. FileMaker's not going to like that return character, so I'm going to need to go var1 equal this, var2 equal that, var3 equal blah. And we'll close that out with that. And we don't even really have to give it a result. We can just give it any garbage result. We can give it an empty result if we wanted to. And we're going to now zoom out, say OK. What I did right there with this one variable is directly equivalent to this. So it's really just a matter of how you actually want to compose your code. var2 is going to be that, and so forth. And then finally we have var3. So if I can do this quick enough, this is equal to blah. And we'll add some spaces here. This and this are the exact same thing as far as FileMaker is concerned. So if you have complex code, the difficulty with this one, this particular instance, is this one hides our code. It obscures it because FileMaker, if it's really long, now wraps this, where here we can see much easier, this is set to this is set to this, and this is set to that. So hopefully if you're a new FileMaker learner, that's not too confusing in terms of what we're doing, but it's a good question and it's good to know. All right, and if you run, Hirmund says, if you run a FileMaker file in singular, the global values will be persistent. Trying to think about the question there. FileMaker file in single user mode. Yeah, global variables are basically, they exist on FileMaker client just for that copy while the solution is running. User A has their own global variables, which can be completely different from user B, who has their own set of global variables. We're going to talk about fields and how they relate to FileMaker Network in an upcoming lesson. One of the biggest questions new users have is, I'm creating a global field, why is it not global to all users? And we'll find out why in that upcoming lesson. All right, so it looks like I don't have too many other questions. Up at the top, Ahmed had said, seems complicated to me. Yes, it will be complicated in the beginning, but hopefully this instruction has been beginner enough that you're able to start to get used to this. If you follow the steps and follow what I did in this video, pause it if you need to after the fact, and actually go through it, you'll start to see how you can actually set and create things. And knowing how to set and create things not just by creating fields, is where you're going to get most of your power with FileMaker. Rana Arif says, I hope I pronounced that right, can we see a multiple variable loop? We will get into that, but that's a little bit down the road of doing a multi-step loop with variables and all kinds of stuff, but it is definitely something that we need to know about. All right, so the wrap-up is, if you're interested in knowing more about FileMaker, you can always, I don't even have Safari up here, let's see what comes up. And I've got the magazine site right there. So remember, you can always check out my magazine site over at FileMaker Magazine. I've got more in-depth articles. I release those weekly, and it's something that you can check out if you're interested in really coming up to speed with FileMaker. All kinds of useful techniques, often provide code, stuff you can just copy and paste, learn from if you want to. And of course, you're going to be able to subscribe here on YouTube. All you're going to have to do is basically check this right here, and you will be subscribed to the channel. Give me the thumbs up if you like this content, and the next video in this series will probably show up right here. All right, till next time, see you later.